She was handing me my coffee when I saw it. Not her face. Not her voice. A scar, thin as a thread, running along the inside of her left wrist, curved like a crescent moon. I had seen that scar before. I had seen it through the cracked window of an upside-down car while rainwater poured over the doorframe, and my seatbelt refused to release, and the world was the wrong color, and I was 23 years old, and I was going to die. I did not die. I stood in the coffee line for 11 more seconds, with my cup going warm in my hands, while the woman whose scar I recognized moved to the next customer and smiled and said, "Enjoy your morning," and had no idea who I was. Neither did I, not for another 3 minutes, not until I sat down and looked at her hands again from across the room and thought, that is not possible. That is not her. You are 43 years old, and you have not thought about this in years, and a scar is just a scar. But the moon curve was specific. The angle of it, starting just below the thumb side of the wrist and bending toward the center. That scar came from a car window. I knew what a car window scar looked like because I had been in the car. It was her. And the thing that happened next is going to take me some time to explain, because it isn't just a story about finding someone. It's a story about what that night cost her, and about a letter sitting in my files for 18 months that neither of us knew existed, and about how close we came to missing each other by exactly 1 week. Let me go back to the night it started. I was 23, working a closing shift at a print logistics company that no longer exists, driving home on Route 9 at 12:40 in the morning. October. Raining the way it rains in October in that part of the country. Not dramatically, not in sheets, just a steady erasure of everything past 50 feet. My headlights made tunnels in it. I had driven this route so many times that I didn't drive it anymore, exactly. I just pointed myself at it and let my hands do what they knew. That is exactly how you drift. It's not sleep. It's not even inattention. Not really. It's a kind of competence that hollows itself out. My eyes went soft for less than 2 seconds, and my tires found the shoulder, and the shoulder was wet and sloped in a way I hadn't ever noticed because I'd never been on it, and the car went sideways, and then it went over. I remember specific things and not others. I remember the sound the car made when it rolled, a grinding, tearing sound, like something being wrung out. I remember that my glasses came off and I could not find them. I remember the smell of the airbag, chemical and sharp. I remember that the car stopped upside down and that the interior light was still on, just hanging there above me, below me. And that this seemed, in the particular calm of shock, to be interesting. My right hand would not close. I understood this as information, not as pain. I thought, that's broken. I thought, I need to get the seatbelt off, and I cannot do that one-handed, not upside down. I tried twice with my left hand, and the mechanism was jammed. Rain was coming in through the cracked windshield and collecting on what had been the ceiling. I could feel it pooling under my shoulder. Then there was a face at the window. A woman, water running down her face, a flashlight held at shoulder height and cutting sideways through the steam from the engine. She looked at me without panic. That is the thing I have never forgotten about her face. How completely without panic she was, and she said, "I've got you. I'm getting you out." She had a tool. Something wrapped in cloth. I never saw it clearly. She used it on the window, and the glass came out in one practiced motion, the way it does when someone knows what they're doing, or has been lucky enough to make a good choice on their first try. She reached in and found the seatbelt mechanism and did something to it I still don't understand, because it released on the third try when it had refused for me twice. And she caught me when I came down because she had anticipated that I would. and positioned herself for it. She was not a large woman. I don't know how she held the weight. She talked to me the whole time she worked. She said her name. She said something about the ambulance being called, that she had called before she stopped, that they were already on their way. She asked me to tell her my name, and I told her, and she used it every sentence after that, the way they train people to do in crisis. You're doing well. You're going to be all right. Keep talking to me. And whether she had been trained or had simply figured out by instinct what a person needed to hear, I couldn't tell. She walked me 20 feet from the car and sat me down on the embankment and sat next to me with one hand on my shoulder until the ambulance lights came over the hill. She said her name. I heard it. I cannot tell you what it was. Shock dissolves specific things and preserves others. It kept the scar and the moon curve and the way she said I've got you, and it dissolved the name completely. Like water over ink. By the time I was on the stretcher, she was gone. 3 days in the hospital. Fractured right wrist. Concussion. 4 cracked ribs. My mother flew in from Phoenix. My best friend from college sat in the waiting room for 5 hours the first day because nobody told him he could come up. The police gave me a name from the accident report. I held on to it the way you hold on to something you know is fragile, carefully, without looking at it too directly. The search had a specific texture I can still describe. First there was the accident report, which I requested from the county records office 6 months into recovery, which I read 3 times in the parking lot of that office before I drove home. I called the number. Wrong person. Completely wrong person. I hired, briefly, a private researcher who took $600 of money I did not have and returned me a list of 7 people with similar names in a 3-county radius, none of whom matched anything I remembered. I wrote a letter to the county sheriff's department asking if they kept fuller records of witness interviews. They wrote back to tell me they did not. What I had was a face and a scar and a voice and 3 sentences she had said. I've got you. I'm getting you out. Keep talking to me. I had the angle of light from the flashlight and the sound of the window and the weight of her arm steadying me on the embankment. I had the moon curve of the scar and the specific quality of her calm. Not cool. Not detached. Calm the way a person is calm, who has decided that panic is not useful and has simply declined to have it. I tried a post on an early internet forum for accident survivors. Nothing came of it. I tried again on social media, years later, a post that went mildly viral in a small way among people who found it romantic, without quite understanding it wasn't romantic. It was something different. It was a debt I had no way to pay, a weight I carried without resentment, but also without relief. 500 comments. None of them were her. I stopped searching the way you stop looking for something you've half accepted is lost. Not with peace, exactly. With resignation that I kept mistaking for peace until October would come around again and I would sit with my coffee and think, she doesn't know. She doesn't know that I built something. That I do work I'm proud of. That there is a daughter. She stopped for 10 minutes in the rain, and I am carrying it for both of us. That was the end of the search. I was 23 and in hospital debt and going through physical therapy for a hand that wanted to forget how to grip. And the world was not interested in waiting. I thought about it every October. I thought about it when I started the nonprofit 5 years later. When I hired my first full-time employee. When my daughter was born and I held her with the wrist that the woman with the scar had pulled through a car window and thought, this would not exist without someone I cannot name. And then I walked into a coffee shop on a Thursday morning in March because my machine had been broken for 3 weeks and the model I'd ordered hadn't arrived, and the coffee shop I normally went to didn't open until 8, and I needed coffee before 7, and I saw her. I waited until the line cleared. This part I did not handle gracefully. I sat with my coffee for 12 minutes rehearsing how to say this in a way that was not alarming, and every version I came up with was alarming. There is no non-alarming way to approach a stranger and tell them you believe they saved your life 2 decades ago, based on the shape of a scar on their wrist. I walked up to the counter. I said, "I'm sorry, this is a strange question. Were you ever on Route 9 in a rainstorm around midnight? It would have been 20 years ago. October?" She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something that doesn't quite land yet. I said, "There was a car accident. Someone stopped and pulled a person out." I watched her face change. Not dramatically. Nothing in this woman's face ever moved dramatically. I was learning. It was a movement behind the eyes before the rest of the face caught up, like a sentence being translated before it was spoken. She put down the cloth she was holding. She looked at my right hand, which has a faint irregularity in the knuckle of the index finger where the bone healed slightly off axis, not visible if you don't know to look, very visible if you do. She said, "The wrist." I said, "Yes." She said, "You kept saying you were fine." I said, "I'm told I was not fine." She said, "No, you were not." She picked up the cloth. She put it down again. She said, "I have to get coverage. Can you wait 10 minutes?" I waited 45. I drank my coffee. I bought a second one. I sat there wondering if she had gone out the back and decided this was not something she wanted to open, and practicing being at peace with that if true. She came back with her coat on. She sat across from me and folded her hands on the table and said, "Tell me how you found me." I told her about the scar. I told her about the failed search. I told her I had thought about her every October for 20 years. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "I didn't know if you lived." Simply, without drama, the way you say a thing that has been true for a long time. I thought about that for maybe a year, whether you lived. Then I stopped thinking about it, because not knowing was easier than not knowing. I said, "I lived." She said, "I can see that." Then she told me why she had stopped. She had been at her sister's house the night of the accident, 40 minutes from home. The fight with her husband had started on the phone midway through dinner. He had called to find out when she was coming back. And she had said later. And he had said how much later. And it had escalated the way those calls do. Every word slightly sharper than the last, until she had said something she did not repeat to me, and ended the call. She had driven the 40 minutes in October rain with the radio off. She said, "I almost told myself it was already handled. You tell yourself that. Someone must have already called. Someone else already stopped." She looked at her hands. But I slowed down. And when I slowed down, I could see the interior light. And I thought, if I were in that car, I would need the interior light to not mean that no one was coming. She had called 911 before she got out of her car. She had her flashlight because she always kept one in the door pocket, a habit from her father, who had been meticulous about preparedness in a way she had absorbed so thoroughly she didn't think of it as a choice. She had the glass tool because it had come with the car, clipped to the sun visor, the kind of purchase that is made, and then forgotten until the moment it is not forgotten at all. She said the hardest part was the seatbelt, that the mechanism was jammed in a way she recognized from an article she had read once, for no reason she could now remember, and that there was a release angle she had tried that worked, and she still didn't know if it would work again on a different car, or if she had simply been lucky. She said, "You kept saying you were fine," a sound that was almost a laugh. You had a broken wrist and cracked ribs, and you were insisting you were fine. I didn't have the heart to argue. I said, "That sounds like me," she said. "I was calm because of you." She looked at me in the way she had when I said I had thought about her for 20 years, not dismissing it, just uncertain where to put a thing that large. Then I told her about my daughter. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photograph I have used as my wallpaper for 3 years. My daughter at her 5th birthday, laughing at something off camera, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She is a child who laughs the way some people breathe, continuously and without self-consciousness. I said, "You saved her life. She doesn't know it. But every year on her birthday I think about you." Miriam looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she cried. Not loudly. Miriam did nothing loudly. She pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes and took one breath and straightened up and said, "I'm sorry. Things have been hard lately." Said it the way someone says something they have said to themselves so many times it is worn smooth. I'm not at my best. I could have left it there. But I looked at her, at the careful control of her, at the way she had pressed the tears away almost before they happened, and I said, "What kind of hard?" And she told me. Her name was Miriam Osai. She had run the coffee shop, Cornerstone Coffee. The small laminated sign above the door said, for 8 years since she was 46, and had left a 20-year career in hospital administration to do the things she had always wanted, and had kept being practical instead. She had been married twice. The first marriage, the one she had been driving home from a fight with on the night of the accident, had lasted 4 more years after that night before dissolving. She talked about this more carefully than she talked about most things, which told me it still had edges. The fight she had been driving home from that night was about the night itself, in a way, not about what happened. Her husband didn't know about the accident yet. She would tell him in the morning. It was about the habit of stopping. He had said, over the phone, standing in their kitchen in their home while she sat at her sister's dinner table, that she had a problem with boundaries, that she gave too much of herself to things that were not her responsibility, that she had stayed at her sister's for 4 hours when she said she would stay for 2, and that this was a pattern, and he needed her to understand it was a pattern. She had said something back. She had driven home in the rain. She had stopped for me. She arrived home at almost 2 in the morning. She had told him about the accident, and he had looked at her for a long moment and said, "Are you hurt?" And she had said no. And he had said, "Good." And then he had said that she could not keep doing things like this, stopping on dark highways in the middle of the night, taking on other people's emergencies. This was exactly what he meant, and he needed her to understand it. She had stood in their kitchen in her wet clothes and understood something else instead, that she was not going to stop stopping. That whatever he wanted her to become, it was not a version of herself she recognized. 4 more years, and then they were done. She said, he wasn't a bad person. He wanted a different kind of wife. Someone more contained. Someone who drove past things. A pause. "I'm not that person." I said, "No, you're not." She looked at me. Then she looked out the window at the street. Then she said, "The second marriage was better in some ways, and worse in others." Darren understood that I stopped for things. He just eventually decided he didn't want to be one of them. She said this without self-pity. I had the impression that Miriam had spent a great deal of time understanding her own history, with the precision of a person who has decided that understanding is more useful than grieving, and that the time she had spent grieving was over. The second marriage, to a man named Darren, had given her something she had not expected. A stepdaughter. The second marriage, to a man named Darren had given her something she had not expected: a stepdaughter. Daisy, Darren's daughter from a previous relationship, had been 3 years old when Miriam came into her life. By the time Miriam and Darren divorced, 3 years ago when Daisy was 5, Daisy had been calling her Mama Me for 2 years and could not fully explain the concept of a step-parent because she had never been given a reason to think she needed a different word. The custody arrangement after the divorce had been informal and functional. Daisy lived with Miriam during the week. Darren had her on weekends and holidays. This had worked for 3 years because Daisy thrived, and because Darren had been, for 3 years, primarily interested in moving forward. New partner, new city, new job. Then, something changed. Miriam wasn't sure exactly what. Maybe the new partner wanted a cleaner slate. Maybe Darren had recalculated. Maybe it was nothing more than what it appeared to be: a man who had spent 3 years at some distance from his daughter and had decided, too late and too suddenly, that distance was not what he wanted. 2 months ago, Darren had filed a motion. He wanted full custody of Daisy. Not primary, full. He was arguing that Miriam was not a fit caregiver. He had submitted financial documentation showing the coffee shop had operated at a loss for 3 consecutive years. He had a psychological evaluation, paid for, performed by a professional his lawyer had selected, describing Miriam as emotionally volatile and a poor decision-maker under stress. He had emails. Emails Miriam had sent during the worst stretch of the divorce, when she had not been sleeping and her fear had gotten out ahead of her language, and she had said things. She showed me some of them. She was that honest with me, that were ugly and untrue, and that she had said, because pain makes people that way. He also had the argument that Miriam was not Daisy's biological mother, that whatever bond they had built over 5 years, whatever the practical reality of who had been doing the work of parenting, the legal ground beneath Miriam's feet was thinner than it looked. The court date was in 72 hours. Miriam's lawyer was a woman at a nonprofit family law organization, overworked, genuinely committed, handling 11 other cases. She had looked at the petition and told Miriam 3 days earlier that it had more traction than she had hoped, that the judge had a conservative record on non-biological parental rights in contested custody cases. That Miriam's best argument was a documented paper trail of sustained primary caregiving, month by month and year by year, who had actually been there, and that Miriam's documentation, while real, was not organized or thorough enough to counter what Darren's lawyer had built. Miriam said all of this in 10 minutes, in the flat voice of someone who has rehearsed it until the emotion is mostly wrung out. At the end, she looked at me and said, "I've been her mother for 5 years. He hasn't had her for more than a weekend at a stretch in 3 years. But he has a lawyer who has done this before, and I have someone who is doing her best and is running out of time." She picked up her coffee cloth again. Old habit. She said, "I'm sorry. You came in for a cup of coffee, and I've just..." I said, "What kind of documentation would help?" She looked at me. I said, "I'm not in law, but I run a nonprofit that does benefits coordination and community resource navigation, and we have worked with family courts before, and I have a colleague who specifically does caregiver documentation for contested situations. I am not promising anything, but I am asking, what kind of documentation would help?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, a timeline. Proof of who has actually been present. Medical records. School communications. Teacher statements. Photographs with dates. Evidence that the financial situation is more stable than his report says. Because his report uses numbers I know are wrong, but I haven't been able to prove it yet. She paused, her own voice, if that's legally usable. She's 8. She knows what she wants. I said, let me call my colleague. Her name is Dara. She has worked in family resource coordination for 11 years and has a gift for turning a disordered box of papers into an argument a judge can follow. I called her on my way back to the office. I said, I need you this week. We met Miriam at the coffee shop at 4 o'clock. What followed was 4 hours I will not describe in full because most of it was Dara and Miriam at a corner table with a laptop and a cardboard box of documents. And the work of it, going through every pediatric appointment, every school email, every permission slip and teacher conference note and pharmacy receipt, was not dramatic. It was just thorough. By 8 o'clock, we had a caregiving timeline. 11 pages. Specific, sourced, chronological, it showed, not argued, showed, who had taken a Daisy to every recorded medical appointment for 5 years, who had been listed as emergency contact on every school form, who had attended every parent-teacher conference for which there was a sign-in sheet, who had submitted the summer camp applications, the after-school program registration, the orthodontist consultation. Then Dara found the numbers problem. The financial report Darren's lawyer had submitted showed 3 years of operating losses. The figures were real. They came from tax filings. But they were incomplete. 18 months ago, Miriam had opened a wholesale account with a grocery cooperative called Greenway Collective. And the revenue from that account, steady, growing, now representing nearly 30% of the shop's monthly income, had not been included in the report. Not forged out. Just not there. The filing year the report drew from had captured only the first 2 months of the account's revenue, before it had ramped up, and Darren's lawyer had not gone back to look at the months since. Miriam's financial picture was not comfortable. Small coffee shops rarely are. But the trajectory was upward, and the business was more stable than the report claimed, and that distinction mattered. Dara said, we need the wholesale contract and the last 12 months of account statements. Miriam said, I have them at home. Dara said, bring them in the morning. I stayed late that night going through our own intake files. This is going to sound impossible. Our organization helps small businesses navigate cooperative membership. When a business applies to join a cooperative we have a relationship with, sometimes the cooperative refers them to us for intake, and we hold the file. Greenway Collective is one of those cooperatives. I searched our intake database for Cornerstone Coffee. I found the file dated 18 months ago. Inside was a standard intake packet, and at the back, a reference letter from Greenway Collective's procurement team, written when Miriam applied for the wholesale account as standard onboarding for new vendors. A letter from a procurement director who had vetted the shop, visited the location, reviewed the operation. The letter described Cornerstone Coffee as a well-run, community-embedded small business with a committed owner. It described Miriam, her responsiveness, her reliability, her professionalism. It said she was an anchor in the community, the kind of small business owner a neighborhood depends on and doesn't always know how to thank. Miriam did not know this letter existed. We had it because the cooperative had routed her intake through our system before approving her account. We had processed it and filed it and never connected the name to any person. It was just a file. I called Miriam at 10 o'clock at night. She picked up on the second ring. I said, I have one more thing to send to your lawyer. A character reference you didn't know existed. From an independent source with no personal connection to you. The kind that is very hard to dismiss. Silence. Then, why are you doing this? I had thought about this answer. I said, because you stopped. You were angry and tired, and you had every reason to keep driving, and you stopped. And because of that, I have a daughter who laughs at things off camera. I don't know how to put that in numbers. But I know what I can do, and I'm doing it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, okay, I sent the letter. The hearing was Monday morning. I went to work. I cannot describe what it was like to sit through scheduling calls and funding applications while somewhere across the city a judge was looking at 11 pages of caregiving documentation and a character reference and deciding whether Adaize would go home Monday night to the woman who had been her mother for 5 years. Miriam's lawyer had told her the Friday before that she felt better about their position than she had at the start of the week. That the caregiving timeline was exactly the kind of documentation the court found credible. That the character reference from the cooperative, from a professional source with no personal stake, was the kind of thing that was genuinely hard to dismiss. That the financial counter-argument was solid. She had also told Miriam not to expect resolution on Monday, that these hearings often went in stages, that they might leave without a final decision and have to come back. Miriam had texted me that morning at 6:15. Just going in. Thank you for everything. I had written back. You stopped. Everything after that is yours. I thought about Adaize all morning. I had never met her. I knew her only from the photograph Miriam had shown me and from the facts of her life. That she was 8 years old. That she had long braids. That she took the school bus home on Tuesdays. That she had made a Valentine's Day card for Miriam last February that said, "You are my favorite person in the world." Misspelling preserved. Miriam had told me, on purpose, and that the card was still on the refrigerator at Cornerstone Coffee, taped to the side of the espresso machine. I thought about what it meant to be 8 years old and to not know that the ground under your life was being argued over in a courtroom. To go to school on a Monday and not know. To come home in the afternoon to the same apartment you had always come home to, and to not know how close that apartment had come to not being yours. I thought about the interior lights still on inside an upside-down car. At 3:47 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Miriam. 11 words. She's staying with me. I don't know how to thank you. I put my phone face down on my desk. I sat there for a while. Then I wrote back. You already did. 20 years ago. She sent me a photograph 2 weeks later. No explanation, just the photograph. The way you send something when words don't quite work. It was Adaize at the coffee shop counter, standing on a step stool to reach it, very seriously holding a small cup as if she were a professional, her tongue slightly out with concentration. Miriam's hands were in the frame, just the hands guiding the cup. The crescent scar visible on the left wrist. They were not looking at the camera. They were looking at the cup. I showed it to my daughter. My daughter is 8 now, the same age as Adaize. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "They look like they fit together." I said, "Yes, they do." Adaize drew me a picture. Miriam sent it in an envelope with a note. She made this herself. She doesn't know the full story. She just knows you helped. In the picture, 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing next to a coffee cup in brown crayon with a small curl of steam. The tall figure has something on her wrist. Orange crayon. A curved mark, drawn with the care of someone who looked at it closely and wanted to get the shape right. The small figure has long braids and is holding the tall figure's hand with both of hers. Under the picture, in the careful block letters of a child learning to make her letters even, this is Mama M-I-A-N-D, this is M-E and, we A-R-E-O-K now. It is on my refrigerator. It will stay there. I have thought about the chain of things many times since that Thursday morning. Miriam stopped because she slowed down to look. And once she looked, she could not leave. She almost didn't stop. She told me this without apology, the full honest version, because she does not sand things down into shapes that make her look better. She was angry. She had been crying. She had a reason to keep driving, and she told herself she would just look, just confirm it wasn't bad, and then she saw the interior light still on inside the car and knew someone was in it. The choice was, keep moving or stop. She stopped, and then I walked into that coffee shop because my espresso machine had been broken for 3 weeks, and the replacement was stuck in a shipping delay, and the coffee shop I normally went to wasn't open before 8 o'clock. A logistics problem. A supply chain delay. I needed coffee before 7 on a Thursday. The choice was wait for my usual place or find something open. I found something open. And in my files, sitting untouched for 18 months, routed through our system by a cooperative doing standard vendor processing with no idea it was doing anything more, was a letter that described a woman as an anchor of her community. A letter that existed because 18 months ago, Miriam had decided to fight for her coffee shop by opening a wholesale account instead of closing, because she had a little girl at home who needed her to stay. A broken machine. A fight with a husband, a step stool, and a wholesale application, and a rainstorm. I don't know what to call the thing that runs between those 4 points. I am not sure it has a name that isn't too large or too small for what it actually is. What I know is that Miriam gave me 20 years I would not have had, and that without those 20 years, I would not have built the organization that had the letter, and without the letter I cannot tell you what would have happened Monday morning in that courtroom. I know this. The letter existed because I built the organization. I built the organization because I had 20 years. I had 20 years because Miriam stopped. Miriam stopped because she slowed down to look, and once she looked, she could not leave. She could not leave because she is a person who does not drive past things, which is the quality that cost her her first marriage and led her to her second marriage and led her to a daisy and led her to fight for the coffee shop when she could have closed it, which is what led to the wholesale account, which is what led to the letter. Every link connected to the one before it. None of them planned. All of them chosen, in the moment they were made, by people who were not thinking about chains of consequence, just doing what they could not do. She asked me once whether I believed things happened for a reason. I thought about it the full honest way, the way she would want me to. I said, I believe people make choices. And sometimes, over enough time and enough distance, choices find each other. I think you made a choice in the rain. And I made a choice to wait at the counter. And something came from both of them that neither of us could have planned. She thought about it. She said, that's almost enough. I think she's right. Almost is where most true things live. Before you go, 2 questions I want to leave with you. Have you ever thought about someone who stopped for you? A stranger, a near stranger. Someone who could have kept moving but didn't, and realized you never learned their name, and wondered sometimes whether they ever knew what they actually gave you. And is there someone in your life right now, not a dramatic rescuer, just a quiet and steady person doing difficult work, without anyone sending a letter on their behalf, who is holding something together for the people around them, who has never once heard anyone say, you are an anchor here, and we see you? If that person came to mind, maybe today is the day you say something. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. A new story every week. All of them true. All of them about the moments that almost didn't happen, and what it means that they did.